I see how hard you've been working to keep me safe. And you did. Like, thank you. Like, you kept me ahead of my dad, and you allowed me to navigate almost 25 years of profound abuse. Like, that's not small. That is not small. And what would that be like now from my adult self to say, hey, we have some other choices?
Welcome to 3%. We're your hosts, Jamie Haig.
And I'm Blake Roberts.
We're two best friends, fathers, husbands, and just two guys trying to figure it out.
We're also therapists, which is probably a pretty important part.
That's true.
And we believe that at our best, people are 97% honest with themselves and others. And it's that hidden 3% of emotions, needs, desires, and behaviors that we keep to ourselves that keep us bound to shame and loneliness, from which many of our issues stem.
Each week on this podcast, we'll interview leaders in the fields of psychology, theology, arts, and athletics to explore holistic masculinity. We're not here to tell you the man you need to be, but we are here to help you explore what gets in the way of being the man you want to be.
We're going to help you develop courage and give you the tools to share your 3% in the relationships that matter most, so you can more deeply connect with yourself, God, and others. So, pull up a chair.
Let's get into it.
So let's be honest, let's be honest, let's be honest, let's be honest, won't you be?
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the 3% Podcast. We've got a very special guest on today. We have the best-selling author, Aundi Kolber, on the show, and you are going to, I think, walk away from a lot with this episode. If you have ever been in a season of life where you feel like you're just white-knuckling it, you're just trying hard to get by and to show up for your family, to show up in your job, if you struggle with an internal critic, which I'm sure nobody else listening does except Jamie and I, then this will be very timely for you. Aundi is somebody who I have read and listened to for a few years and have been very impacted personally by her words, and they have helped me experience a type of compassion for myself that has changed a lot of things for me. She is a therapist, a wife, a mom, a speaker, a best-selling author of the books Try Softer, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. Her latest book, I believe, is Strong Like Water. Is that right? Or what's the order?
Yes. So Strong Like Water, and then I had a book come out called Take What You Need, which
That's right.
Yeah.
a contemplative coffee table book. So it's a little bit more of like little bite size.
Okay. I want to hear more about that one. I want to start today by, I'm going to read a little paragraph from Aundi's book, Try Softer, the subtitle, A Fresh Approach to Move Us Out of Anxiety, Stress, and Survival Mode and into a Life of Connection and Joy. I'm going to read this section that you talk about in chapter 9, Trying Softer with Your Internal Critic. And we could talk about maybe in a second the concept of try softer, where that came from, what that means to you, because the concept for me is like just even knowing what it is has helped me so much. But I want to read this section because as I read this and was flipping back through the book of what I wanted to start with, I was like, oh man, we all can relate to this. So in the beginning of chapter 9, you start with, let's see, you're talking about a worship song that kind of came from Psalm 145, and you started with the verses, Psalm 145, verses 8 and 9, where you say, "The Lord is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and rich in love. The Lord is good to all, and he has compassion on all that he has made." And then you go on to say, "As I sang along, I believed these words with as much of myself as I could, but I couldn't live as if they were true. I wanted to move with the freedom that comes from knowing I could receive the kindness God offers. I wanted to let myself believe that God's posture towards me was gentle, gracious, and compassionate. But I couldn't fully receive this truth because my internal critic was too strong. Every time I failed to meet my own rigid expectations, the words I spoke to myself were far from loving. How could you have been such an idiot? You should have seen that coming. You are too much. It's all your fault. No one wants you around anyway. Whether I'd done something to set my dad off or missed a key shot in a basketball game, my first response was often to blast myself for not doing more or being better at life. I punished myself for being human, internalizing and sometimes even magnifying the judgment I felt from others. I tried ignoring my sadness and exhaustion, and I stayed on high alert in an attempt to avoid making another misstep. I wanted to live from the conviction that God's love was good, but that desire wasn't enough to overcome my self-hatred.
Holy cow.
Yeah, I just thought, let's just jump right into it, because even rereading that, I can feel in my body the connection to the desire of that. And we know a lot of our listeners now, and we know that they share that similar desire, that I deeply want to believe what I know to be true, and yet I have this internal battle that is keeping it from going from my head to my heart. And we could have so many jumping off points from there, but my curiosity for you, because I'm sure that you talk about later in the chapter, why did you write that? Like, where does that come from? And what is your relationship like now with that internal critic?
Yeah. Well, I love that you're starting here. I think in the 6 years that I've been doing interviews for Try Softer, I don't think I've ever never had someone read that or like pick that particular part out. And certainly I've talked about internal critics and stuff, but I love that you're starting there. And yeah, I think I wrote that because I think, and we can get into the nuts and bolts of Try Softer a little bit more too. But I would say the lens that I use when I think about this work is that I developed a really fierce internal critic of myself, partly because that kept me one step ahead of my dad. Versus my dad was extremely dangerous as a person. Like, he was terrifying. And I am highly sensitive. I mean, apart from being a trauma survivor, I think that's also just part of my makeup. And so that part of what that means is that I was wired to have a really good awareness of my environment and the people I was around. And then in addition to that, because of the trauma that I experienced, it interacts with the sensitivity to be like, I have like extremely good, I'm like making little like antenna, like I have very, very astute antenna that sometimes I've had to work to actually like be like, I don't, even though that information is true, I can't do anything with that right now. So I share that to say all of that information developed in me, and there's like multiple different like modalities we could look at that sort of strengthens this idea that we have sort of parts of ourselves or patterns that develop in order to help us survive trauma, disturbing situations, places where we are not experiencing safety. And so, you know, for me, so I identify as a survivor of complex PTSD. And that part of that, what that meant for me is that from like before I had language or words or memory, I was unsafe. And I learned very early to adapt to my environment. And one of those things has been my internal critic. And that internal critic sort of kept me in line. I think that there's a way in which that internal critic wasn't only my dad, but was strongly influenced by his abusive behavior. And that then became something that, like, if I was hard on myself, then my dad didn't have to be so hard on me.
Woo.
And like, if I was a really high performer, the chance of me getting more of what I needed was higher, because that was the currency of love that was available to me when I was a kid, was that if I was excellent, there was a certain needs, not fully, not everything I needed, not unconditional, like I got you no matter what, but like at least I was viewed with a level of respect, kind of, if I was really excellent, which I ended up being, like a college basketball player, highest leading scorer of all time in my high school. Like I had some things, I had some ways that I adapted. And so that internal critic, that's how I view it. My internal critic is that was the role. Now, the internal critic wasn't doing it in ways that I wanted it to continue, but I came to respect my internal critic as trying to do a job. And that job was helpful. Like that part of myself did do that job in such a way that it did keep me safer for some parts of my life, even though it was also icky, painful. I don't want to keep that going. And so to answer your final question, which was, what is my relationship like now with that internal critic? And I would say it has transformed greatly. Particularly, I would say the last 10 years of my life. Just part of it has been gaining a lot more support and resources. My marriage has been a profound resource in my life. I've had a lot of people who have, including like a couple of good therapists, just people who communicated a level of seeing me and caring about me no matter what. And it's almost like parlaying that care allowed me to, like, my adult self, that's kind of how I think of like when we're like connected to our true self. My adult self could sort of work with that, that critic and say, look, I know you're trying to help. Like, and I appreciate what you've been trying to do. And also, like, newsflash, like, I'm 42 years old. I am not a child in a home where I am trapped anymore.
Yeah.
I don't need that. I do not need to perform or belong in the ways I used to need that. And so over time, that internal critic has turned into something, almost like what's been cool is like, rather than turning that anger inward, that internal critic has learned to sort of face outward and say, hey, like, is this situation like a good situation for you to be in? Is this in alignment with who you are?
I've never thought about, I think a lot about the internal critic and shame, and I've never thought about it that way.
We're both pretty IFS style therapists, and you just broke our brains.
Yeah, like this idea that so some listeners would be familiar with us talking about this part of us, or even like having a relationship with our internal critic. That may be familiar to some. To others, it may be like, what are you talking about? Have a relationship with my internal critic? Like, I'm trying to get rid of that voice. But this idea that you're talking about, which is that we could change almost the role of that to where it turns outward as opposed to inward, to assess and criticize, if you will. Like, that's maybe not just a negative word, the environments around us, because if we didn't have that, then we would continue to put ourselves in situations that are not good for us. That's a really freeing reframe.
Paradigm shifting. Yeah. Okay. So I think plenty of people who listen to this podcast will be familiar with how it feels to have an inner critic who is doing a lot of self-assessment and bringing that. I think maybe even they can resonate with you as you're talking about, it allowed me to stay a step ahead of someone who was unsafe in my life. I think what I am curious about, because I do think we have plenty of people who are married who listen, but I also think we have a lot of men who are single and are hearing like, oh, I desire healing too. I don't have that marriage, but you mentioned both your marriage and your friendships creating the space for this to turn more into that outward facing part. And as much as you're willing, I know it would be encouraging. Just, I'm thinking of messages from people. I know it would be encouraging for these folks to hear, like, what is it about relationships and how did you need to show up in them in order for maybe I'm even asking this for me. I have a history of abuse at the hands of a pastor, and I grew up in a family system that I can now recognize, like, certainly not maliciously, but there were 5 of us under the age of 6, and it's hard to be seen in that space.
Like just practically even.
Practically. And I think I walked away feeling that. And so not because I was trying to stay a step ahead of someone dangerous, but because I was actually, if I'm being 3% honest, I was trying to stay a step ahead of all my other siblings in value. I became very performative and was very good at it too. I mean, not all-time leading scorer at my high school good, but pretty good.
Yeah.
And so this is a very long-winded question.
It's good though.
Our listeners are going to be like, what, Jamie turned into Blake or something? I'm wondering, how did the relationships that you have now reform how that part of you shows up?
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Yeah. Well, I want to say a couple of things. First, thank you for sharing that. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and I think I want to acknowledge, I think, how common it is in families. And oftentimes, I have a very specific story. Not everybody has my story, but I think what a lot of people resonate with in my story is not getting what they needed. Because I had a parent, my mom, who really was loving, but was not able, because of her own abuse and her own trauma, was not able to keep me safe and not able to keep us safe. And so it's like, in the currency of my family, and I think what a lot of people resonate with is, it's like, as kids, we are designed to literally depend on the connection of our caregivers. It's not if you will have an attachment, it's the quality of the attachment. Yeah. That's the thing, is it like my attachment with my dad was disorganized, meaning, which is what often happens when a caregiver is abusive, because you need love, but you can't move towards the person that's supposed to be the source of love, right? So it creates confusion and all these things. And I won't go all the way into attachment right now, but the point I want to make is the performative piece in systems. And I believe this is actually the grace of God, that we adapt. We're not saying to ourselves, how do I get my needs met? We just get our needs met the best we can. And it was similar in our family. Like, it's like, oh, if there's a quarter of a cup of attention and love to go around, then how is everybody going to try to figure out how to get as much from that cup that they can? Right? And every family system, to some extent, is a question of, what is the currency that allows you to access a little bit of the care that you need, right? And so that's going to look different for us, every one of us, dependent on our family and our caregivers and their wounds and resources and privileges, and all of these things come together to create a unique dynamic. And so I want to name that.
Yeah.
And then I want to shift to what what you're saying. How do these connections, how have these connections been a part of the transformation of this part of myself? And so what I would say, there's a couple pieces, and one I want to hit just briefly on neurobiology, because I think that helps us understand why it matters. First and foremost, when you are a person who's experienced trauma, oftentimes, and it's unresolved trauma, a normal thing that happens is your window of tolerance shrinks. So your range of arousal in which you can feel your feelings or experience something, remember something, or all of those things, it gets smaller in order to accommodate the reality that life has not been safe. And because it's not safe, our body is actively working on our behalf to say, how do I make sure that doesn't happen again? Right? So in order to do that, we're more on high alert anyway, which is where, so this internal critic is part of that, is one of those protectors saying, how do we make sure that doesn't happen again? How do I not get reamed by my dad again? How do I not get, shamed and have to go into dissociation because that was so painful? And so one of the things that's cool about our connection with people is that when we are in the presence of other regulated nervous systems, that window of tolerance, it gets bigger. It expands.
Yeah.
And this is just what happens. This is just how we're made. That this is what happens with a parent who's regulated with their dysregulated kiddo, is the parent is literally leveraging their regulation to allow that kiddo to enter into a bigger window of tolerance in order that they can move through their emotions.
Sorry, real quick, could you just say what regulation and dysregulation means?
Yeah, when I'm talking about regulation, I'm basically talking about access to that window of tolerance. So our prefrontal cortex is partially or fully online. If we bring in polyvagal theory, we have some connection to our ventral vagal. So that's like pro-social. I'm able to feel like I can connect with people. I'm able to connect to parts of my brain that are more like advanced and essentially like I can connect to my executive function. I'm just more myself. And in that place, it doesn't mean we don't have emotions. We can be frustrated and regulated. We can be excited and regulated. The question is are we connected enough to some safety? And then the dysregulation, I would say, is when we leave that window of tolerance, that prefrontal cortex is mostly going offline in proportion to a certain level of threat that we're assessing. And then we begin to respond more from that lower survival brain. And for those who have a history of trauma, that's going to be connected to some of those stories too.
Yeah.
So that's going to be more, it's going to be more vulnerable once we leave that window of tolerance.
Yeah.
So with that, when we have this connection to other people and our window is bigger, we have the expansiveness to feel what we need to feel. What I would say is that in my own life, feeling the witness that I am actually not alone, that I am actually like held, this is Dan Siegel's language, I am held in the mind of another. Like somebody sees me and they're not seeing me based off of like what I could do for them. And they're not giving me care because they're like, well, since I gave you this, now you're going to do this for me. And that experience, and I will just say like, that is something that sometimes we have to titrate, or we have to go little by little into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In our relationships, you mean?
Yeah. Like if relationships have largely been unsafe, it's really hard to go from like everybody's unsafe to being like, now I'm going to be vulnerable with 20 different men, if I'm thinking of a guy, or 20 women or whatever, like, and they're going to all know me deeply. And like, that's usually a recipe for some whiplash.
100%. Yeah.
Because our body needs to build up the scaffolding to say, like, this is why therapy can be so helpful. because it's like a microcosm. Like, can this one person in this one space get to know me in a way that feels like my body can tolerate it?
Mm-hmm.
And I build that. And then I leverage that because now maybe I have my therapist and I have this other good friend and they're getting to know me and they're seeing me. And I'm able to speak honestly about my experience with these two people in the world. And maybe that's it. And even that is this work.
Yeah. That's my story. I mean, before, I don't know if you know, but our listeners do, Jamie and I met in 12-step recovery 7 years ago.
Yeah, almost 8.
Almost 8 years ago. And pre-recovery, I wasn't really honest with anybody. I mean, obviously, like I ended up in a 12-step recovery room. That's
how you get
due
there.
in large part to not being honest with myself and others. So then I start experiencing and that's like growing up in church my whole life too, and being in men's groups and things where I am honest to a degree, but not about certain things. And then I get into recovery and it's like, yeah, okay, you're going to be honest about the thing that you most want to not be honest about. And I start to experience some real connection and freedom in that. And then I'm looking, not consciously, but like I'm kind of going, oh, I didn't get this type of connection because I wasn't honest. And this type of connection now feels really good. And so now I'm going to start doing this just with everybody. And then Jamie could know who I'm like thinking of in my mind. That then led to some harm, intentionally or unintentionally, of people using the vulnerability to then get something that they needed. And I remember sitting in my therapist's office one day and kind of talking about this, and he goes, just kind of very flippantly goes, you don't have to tell everybody everything. And I was like, what do you mean? Yes, I do. Like, I attempted suicide because I didn't know how to tell people anything. So like, if I want real honest relationship, I've got to tell everybody everything. But it wasn't, what I learned and what I'm still learning is that it's not about telling everybody everything. It's more about knowing who is trustworthy and safe to be able to tell. And like you were saying, sometimes that happens in small incremental ways. And then the more my body gets familiar with the safety of that person, I can tell them more things. But I just swung the pendulum too far. And I can have compassion for myself for that. Like, yeah, I was just wanting that connection that I didn't have. But
it's so exciting to feel it. I remember falling apart the first day at, for everybody listening who's unfamiliar, when you walk into a 12-step meeting for the first time, the first thing they do is they say, do we have any newcomers here? Well, they do some readings first, and they're like, do we have any newcomers here? Which is just such a rude way to put you on the spot when you're already in a terrifying space. So you got to raise your hand. And then they do something even more rude, which is they break out into a separate, smaller sub-meeting to focus solely on you.
Yeah.
And in that meeting, they ask you to tell them as much as you are willing to about why you're here. And then everyone else, after you shares why they're there. And I remember falling apart not only because, it was so nice to be honest.
Yeah.
But not only that, but to your point, what I'm recognizing right now is like, that's one of the first times I allowed myself to risk being held. Mm-hmm. To quote that Dan Siegel language, like, it wasn't that people didn't want to hold me. That's kind of the work. That's the longer work now, is can I separate what was malicious harm versus unintentional harm? And there were both in my story. But it wasn't that people necessarily didn't want to hold me. It's that what you said, my window of tolerance, my abuse went on for 8 years, And like my window of tolerance shrunk to like gonzo, like rice paper. And my inner critic even took a backseat to my firefighters, because it was just like, this inner criticism is unnecessary. We're going to just numb everything out because anything you feel is too much. And so maybe somebody listening is like, I don't really have an inner critic, but I do feel numb. And I think that's a place that I got to. But to your point of like why the relationship can be so healing, it's like my whole body's washed over with the gratitude of it right now. I'm remembering that first meeting and being like, that's where I met my sponsor. And I remember sitting in there just going like, I don't know what this is, but I've been fighting coming here for months and I don't want to go anywhere else anymore.
Yeah. And so first of all, thank you both just for sharing those parts of your story. I think, I mean, just it's so real and it's so complicated. And I think for each person, and I think that's, one of the things I say a lot in therapy is like, if it were simple, you wouldn't be here. Like you're a smart, capable person. This is not about, it's not simple. Our systems are so complex. And usually, oftentimes, they are that way because they've needed to be, right? They've needed to be, which is what we honor. But as I hear you say that, even just acknowledging, right? Like, I often in my work, I find it so helpful to keep that neurobiology in mind. And it, like, as we talk about things, and it's like, when I think about the internal critic, a lot of times I think more sympathetic nervous system. There's like an activation of like mobilization, like do this better or be better or something like that. But what often happens, and you can see this like at different stages in people's journey, where it's like maybe they've been in sympathetic and then there is no, like they can't move because they're stuck, because they're unsafe, and their body can't help but go down into that dorsal, right? And sometimes it's a forced dorsal using, drugs or alcohol or whatever to make that happen because it's so painful. And sometimes our body just says, well, that's all I can handle. Yeah. Emergency break. And I'm dissociated. And I, it looks oftentimes gets real mixed in with depression and all those things because it's just so much. And all of this, certainly I don't want to lump all of this all together, but I think a common theme here is an unwinding, right? That there's an unwinding that happens in the presence of safety. And oftentimes, for many people, a lot of the harm has been relational. And the work, the ongoing work, is figuring out how do we find the repair in the way and at the pace our body can receive, so that we can come to befriend that inner critic, and we can come to allow that critic to feel soft enough to say, hey, I know you're on my team. Would you want to do something else? Would you want a different job? Would you want to help that anger instead of having to carry that anger as though it's your fault? What about if we allowed that anger to live with the person who caused the harm? What if they got to carry that now? Right? What would that be like?
You're preaching now. I can see the passion through the screen on your face about it. And the way to do that is, it's a perfect segue into the concept of try softer. And I don't want to reduce you to just one book. It's just the book that I'm most familiar with. And it's been so helpful again. And I'm going to read this real quick, not as long as the other one, but this real quick from the intro of the book. You said, I'd seen the signs many times before: hunched shoulders, clenched fists, heavy sighs, apologies for not being or doing enough. I'd come to notice these cues in others. I'm a therapist after all. But this time I was the one in need of support. I was sitting in my counseling supervisor's office, feeling suffocated and exhausted, anxious and amped up, which is something I think everybody feels right now. I thought the very fiber of my soul might give out if I tried to do or figure out one more thing. And then you go on to talk about this interaction with your supervisor and how you're just confessing how worn out you are and how you're so tired, and it's like no matter what you do, it's never good enough. And then you this ending part of the intro where you say John, your supervisor, leaned into you, sensing my ambivalence, and goes, "I'm not asking you to stop caring, Aundi, just to change the way you are caring. What I mean is, what if, just for a change, instead of trying harder, you tried softer?" First of all, I love your writing. The way you write is so inviting. I mean, we work with primarily men, and I would say, at least for me, every day I experience some version of men coming in here and talking about how their version of trying harder isn't working. What does it actually mean to try softer? And is that just a one-time thing? Like, do you just kind of flip the switch and you're like, oh, okay, I just need to try softer now, and then I'm not going to try hard on myself anymore? But what if I stop trying harder? Like, does that mean I'm giving up and I'm like surrendering to things and I'm going to lose control?
Yeah, no, great questions. And yeah, I mean, I think it's always interesting. I always find it an interesting litmus test how people respond to the title Try Softer. Like and maybe even for your listeners, you might just get curious as you're hearing like what comes up for you. Maybe if it feels okay to you, maybe even in your body, what do you notice, when you hear those words? Because I think that in and of itself is information. And I'm going to explain a little bit more, but it's information because all of us have these different stories about softness. And for men in particular, there's really particular narratives in our culture about what it means to be a man, about what it means to essentially not have emotions, about what it means to belong as a man specifically. But I wrote Try Softer not just for women, but also for men. And part of the reason, just to not to bury the lead, but the idea behind Try Softer and what I say oftentimes when I speak is that I have spent probably, so that was 17 years ago when I had that conversation with my supervisor. Yeah. And I have spent really probably the last, up until I wrote that book, and it's even still evolving, sort of saying, well, what would that look like then? Mm-hmm. Like, it was a huge thing for John to say that. He was such a grounded, healthy person. Mm-hmm. And I did have some ambivalence, but it shifted something in me. I was like, I want that. How do I do it? And so I've sort of spent a lot of my career saying, I want to answer that question. And that's where this book came from. And what I would say it means to try softer is for us to learn, and for those who come from the Christian tradition, I believe we do this in participation with a God who has profound compassion towards us, that we would steward that compassion and then pay compassionate attention to our own wounds, our own hearts, our own stories that are hurting or breaking, that we would use that attention to turn towards the pain, essentially. And we can, sometimes hypothetically, I don't know how this lands for your listeners, because for some people, they're like, oh yeah, cool. And other people are like, what? I don't even know where to start. But part of this work, especially for those who maybe have no idea what that even looks like, is that we begin to develop the capacity to what Dan Siegel calls think about thinking. We would have the ability, this goes back to that window of tolerance that I was naming, that we can only pay compassionate attention when we are connected to that window of tolerance. Because without that, we are in the pain, we're not with the pain. And when we're in the pain, we are over-identified with the pain, which is very normal. This is what happens in a trauma or a stress response. But it also means we lose perspective and we lose a lot of choice. And when we don't have choice, that means we are just gonna like essentially live the narrative, live the pattern, live from the part that has been hurt, rather than being able to say to the part, to the pain, hey, I see you. Like, I know you've been working so hard. You know, maybe me to my inner critic. I see how hard you've been working to keep me safe. And you did. Like, thank you. Like, you kept me ahead of my dad, and you allowed me to navigate almost 25 years of profound abuse. Like, that's not small. That is not small. And what would that be like now from my adult self to say, hey, we have some other choices. We don't have to keep living this narrative. How can I help you come to see this reality that things actually are different? I do have people I can trust. I am in this present moment state. I do have access to compassion in a way that I did not have access to compassion when I was a kid.
Yeah, I think that has been, for the folks listening who feel like what you were describing as like the what, that's been a long road for me. I don't know how you feel about that, Blake.
Which part has been a long road?
The road to being able to be with my parts instead of from my parts.
Yeah. And probably, I don't know if you would agree with this, Aundi, but probably because it's a road that doesn't end.
Yeah.
Like there's not a final destination on the road.
Yeah. I mean, Blake knows this. I've been very into the idea of what it is to garden myself this year, which Chuck is also into that. But yeah, like seeing there's a number of people we've talked to who like that idea keeps coming up, and the thought that like being with my parts, it's why I love how you said it can turn outward, because it's cultivating something that I view historically, and still, if I'm being honest right now, like I still get so resentful of how painful some of these parts have made my experience. So my inner critic still pops up. And part of this is because career-wise, I keep hopping to do new things. And with new things comes the opportunity to learn and grow. And my performative nature makes learning and growing very achievement-oriented. So then the part of me that thinks that's where my value is going to come from gets really loud with all of that. And I get really resentful that it gets really loud, because I would rather enjoy the process of learning and growing like I see some of my friends who are able to do. And I have a hard time enjoying the process. I enjoy having learned. I enjoy feeling like I understand things. But I get resentful of the inner critic who makes me so afraid that I'll fail before I begin. And the idea that I could cultivate that part of me into something that's outward facing and discerning rather than inward facing and condemning is very exciting to me.
Yeah.
Because I think, just been trying to get it to quiet down.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, be quiet. Sit over there in the corner.
Yeah.
Totally. If I may, I want to just name, and I think that's really common in Christian spaces.
Yeah.
Right? That it's like, we just cut that off. Right? We just put that away. Put it down, push it way down. When it's like, but And yes, there is plenty of imagery to say, yes, we want to die to that which is not truly us. That was never really us. Yeah, let that go. Let that be fertilizer for the garden. But that which is you, which your parts are you. God gave us these abilities to survive. That's beautiful. But we don't have to keep replaying the pain. That's not the point of the parts. Right? And that it may be something to pique your interest for my next book, Strong Like Water. I actually talk about this concept a bit more, that, these parts of myself. I have this part that I call basketball Aundi.
Nice.
And she is fierce.
Oh, yeah.
She's like, pass me the ball. Like, give
Yeah.
me my,
Oh, yeah.
pass me the ball. Like, I got.
She's an uptown baller.
She's like, let's go.
I play pickup basketball like 3 days a week, and so I very much resonate with this right now.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
It's a different. People are like, "You're a therapist?" when I'm playing basketball. Like, yes, I promise.
No, but I share that to say, like, that part of me I used to be afraid of for a long time after I left, like when I graduated college, and just this whole season where I was like, that part I wanted to put in the shadow away. Like, ooh, she takes up way too much space. She's a little spicy. She's a little something. It's not palatable here. And working with that part to unlearn and to grieve and to unwind the parts of that was, because some of that came from some trauma experiences, but some of that, like, it's like that part has become such an ally to me. Like, that part's present right now. Like, that's part of who allows me to step on stages and say, yep, let me tell you a little bit about what I do and who I am.
Yeah.
In, like, it for wholeness.
Yeah.
On behalf of wholeness. Not on behalf of my survival anymore, but for wholeness.
That's good. Yeah.
Good.
Jamie, can I put my therapist hat on for a second?
Sure.
Because I've been noticing this with myself and clients a lot. I heard you say my inner critic still shows up. And I've noticed for myself, so I guess I'm maybe putting my therapist hat on for myself and using something you said. Whenever, when I hear you say still, and maybe this isn't true, so you can tell me if it's not true for you. Whenever I hear you say, I still put, or my inner critic still shows up, I hear this like subtle shame in the word still. Like, it implies that it shouldn't be there, which then I would imagine would make it hard to have compassion on something that's still there that shouldn't be there.
I would take it a step further and say it's not just shame, it's also resentment.
No.
Yeah.
I've just noticed, like, in myself how many, maybe I heard it because I'm noticing it in myself, how often I can say this part of me still shows up, or I still do this thing. And I'm just recognizing for myself how even just the acknowledgement of noticing myself say still helps me kind of like catch that shame that comes with that, and then try softer.
Yeah, even in what Audi's saying, I'm recognizing how cold I show up to a part who's trying to show up for me.
And that makes so much sense, especially what I know about your story.
Yeah. Yeah. It has been very helpful in the past. And the way it shows up, the way it has shown up, no longer serves me. And I still show up to it the way I always have, which is that this is tiring. But in the past, I was beholden to it, and now I show up to it as this is tiring and I don't want you. So that's how it's switched. And where I'm trying to move to, which is obviously I can't wait to go just consume all of your books. Where I'm trying to move to is I do want you. And I I think where I get stuck sometimes, and I wonder if people listening resonate with this, is I don't know what role you play.
Mm-hmm.
And so my inner critic pops up again and goes, you can't tell somebody to do something if you don't know what role they play.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like this interesting loop that I'm in this moment noticing that part plays for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But what I love in listening to you talk about it is like when you're talking about this basketball Aundi part of you, I'm like, I totally have I used to play music live, and I love performing. Doing this, once I'm doing it, is not scary. I get scared leading up, not because I don't think I can do this part, but because I'm afraid of the failure of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so it is a very interesting, like, I found myself listening to you talk about basketball Aundi going like, oh man, I want to be kinder to the performer Jamie who comes alive getting to play in that setting. Because it feels like play for sure.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. And I just think, this journey, which obviously, earlier you referred to it like, is this temporary or is it a long, is it forever kind of? And, the way I think of it is that I don't believe I'll ever graduate. And I actually don't want to graduate from trying softer because I think that this is a posture. Paradoxically, it's actually deeply resilient.
Yep.
Deeply resilient. To have to be able to pay compassionate attention. And really, I believe this is God's posture towards us. I believe this is the posture we ultimately want to have towards our kiddos and our neighbors. Like there is a way in which, because it's compassion, people misunderstand compassion. Compassion is soft, but it doesn't fold.
Ooh.
Additionally, compassion also has the traits of, so Kristen Neff's work talks about tender compassion and fierce compassion. And that can be talked about as tender self-compassion and fierce self-compassion. And there are times when, let's say we have a part of us come up that we're maybe doing something that's harmful to us or someone else. We can honor and acknowledge, maybe from a place of tenderness, why that exists, but we might need some appropriate fierceness, not shame, but like a good parent who's watching their child about to touch a hot stove. Oh, baby, no, we don't touch that.
Yeah.
I love you. Oh, this is a safety issue. We can't do that.
Yeah.
Come on
That's
back.
good.
Right?
That's good.
And so that's the fullness, I think, of compassion. And I think, and so for me, I really believe this is just a posture of how to be human. And it invites us in the different places we are, whether that's wherever we are with our parts.
Yeah.
What gives me so much hope and courage is that compassion is a place to land.
Nice.
We can have compassion for the ways that we don't have compassion.
Yep. Yeah, you said on the page before the intro, learning to try softer is not a one-time event, but a way we learn to be with ourselves. Try Softer, was that your first book? Okay, and that was 6 years ago, you said?
It'll be 6 years in January.
Wow. So that was right before COVID?
It was, yes.
Wow.
January. It was like the month before COVID. Yep.
Wow. What an
Timely.
interesting timing.
Yeah, timely.
We could talk for hours. This has been, I knew it would be a treat. It has been a treat. You have been speaking about this way of being with ourselves for 6 years. You've written more books kind of off this way of being with ourselves. Everybody go get the other books too, because I know they're good. Two questions as we end, or I guess three. The third one is just going to be like, is there another book in the works, or like, what can people expect from you? Is basketball Aundi getting her hands dirty yet? First question is, in 6 years of having these projects out into the world and getting a more broad interaction of people through your speaking and social media and all these things, what has been a surprise to you? And then the second question would be, what is something that is hopeful to you in the last 6 years of doing this?
I love those questions. Okay. Yeah. I think honestly, the surprise was really that the book has resonated the way that it has.
It's resonated big time.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's really super like I'm not just saying that, like, it is incredibly humbling.
Sure.
Because first of all, I used to joke when it first came out, I was like, hey, do you want to go on Amazon and rate my childhood trauma? Like I've been saying that to my friends. Partly because I was like, I hope some people read it. Like, I hope, you know what I mean? I worked really hard on it. I literally, it was like blood, sweat, and tears. Like at that point in time, it was literally everything I had.
Wow. You weren't sitting down going like, I wonder what kind of book I could write that would end up selling hundreds of thousands of copies.
Absolutely not. I mean, I really was like, I hope a few people read it.
Yeah.
And so that has just been, I mean, and here's the balance. I think you write a book because you hope people will read it. So it's
Right.
not that I didn't want people to read it, but I just, I was a therapist with like, that's it. That's like,
Right.
that's all that I had to like, be like, I'm going to share this book. So it has been a little bit for me like this way in which it's like, I don't want to ever put numbers as the thing that like makes it be like, see, God blessed this.
Yeah.
Because I think that isn't always helpful or true.
Sure.
That's good.
But I also have experienced this way in which my personal experience is that it has reminded me a lot of the story of the loaves and fishes of the boy in the Bible. And I feel like I brought this story, like, that this work and story and really this framework is kind of how I think of Try Softer. And I brought it and I was like, okay, God, here's what I have. And God was like, okay, let's see what we could do with that. And let's see, right? Like, because for me, I don't personally have the capacity to interact and be able to work with that many people, right? And so to see that message, for it to be able to land with people in the ways that it has is just, it's profound for me, and it brings me a lot of joy. And it's so cliche, but it literally feels like a child. Like, I'm like, oh, look at Try Softer.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like, high five, Try Softer. Kind of
That's
like when my
great.
kids are at school and I find out like they got student of the month. I'm like, look at you out in the
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
you're
Yeah. I
So
love that.
that is probably the most surprising.
Okay. And then what's something that is
Hopeful.
hopeful?
Yeah. I think, the world is a lot right now. There's a lot happening. And I only just say that because I'm a big believer in not bypassing.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of polarization. There's just a lot of really valid things happening. And what I see and what I think is being created in a lot of spaces is a desire for a deeper, like, authentic compassion. Like, people like kind of getting tired of just even like the pace of things like around, like, it's not that social media is all bad, but like there's a lot of good. There's been so much good that I've experienced personally, but the way that we're existing in the world is so fast. And I think we're just not created for it.
Yep.
And I see a real authentic desire to say, what does it look like for us to actually lean on connection and community and even returning to ourselves in ways we haven't in a long time. And that
Yep.
gives me a lot of hope.
Yep. Us too. That's why we're doing this whole thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you have anything else you want to say? Because I have one more. I'm just very into reading things from books today. I have one more quote that I want to read that I think sums up, for me at least, what Aundi's doing.
No, I'm very thankful that you brought your work and that you were willing to share the loaves and fish, because it matters a lot.
Yep,
Thank
it does.
Thank you.
Frederick Buechner is one of my favorite authors, and he has written so many good books. One called A Crazy Holy Grace. I've read passages from this to you before, Jamie. The Healing Power of Pain and Memory. And he wrote this, I was reading it recently, about coping with pain. And the last sentence sums up what you have done. So I'm reading this to you. I'm sure there are 100, this is what he says, I'm sure there are 106 other ways we have of coping with pain. I think at one time or another, each one of us has probably coped with it in all of those ways. Right before that, he was talking about all the ways we cope. One day, one way, another day, another way. Certainly years ago, and I suppose to a degree still, I dealt with the sad parts of my life by forgetting them. I didn't know I was forgetting them. I didn't say to myself, I'm going to forget them. But the mechanism of forgetting had been so strongly switched on in my childhood that it became a sort of automatic response. Another way of dealing with your pain is to be a good steward of it. And I would say that you have been a good steward of your pain.
Mhm.
And thank you for that.
Thank you for that. That's beautiful. And it's affirming, because as you both know, this work there's so much goodness, and it's hard work.
Yes.
Mhm.
It requires a lot of us.
Yep.
And I believe it's worth it, but it is one of those things where I think we become an apprentice
Yeah.
Yeah.
to that deep work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. Anything exciting in the works, or are you just taking it easy?
Taking it easy, doing the very hard work of being a therapist.
Right after I said that, yeah.
No, thanks for asking. I am currently working on another book. It's a little early to go into details.
That's
but
okay.
It's a book I'm really excited about. I think every one of my books, I think that I've written, calling on basketball Aundi a little bit, I use the language of like, I leave it on the floor.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like when I'm done, that's all that I had. That's
Yeah.
everything I had at that time. And that's where, so I'm kind of in the middle of it with this book, and we are rumbling. And there's a
Nice.
lot of good, but
Nice.
yeah, so I'm excited about it.
Are we still playing any pickup basketball these days?
So I haven't played in a little bit, but my son is enjoying basketball, and we're kind of
Oh, yeah.
getting into it a little bit. He's 8.
Time to show him up.
He's like, he'll be like, and my husband is great and a great athlete too, but he didn't really play basketball, and he'll be like, oh yeah, no, mom's way better at basketball.
Yeah. And your son's probably
I
like,
get
okay.
I get a little glimmer.
That's
I love that.
probably what I will be telling my children. My wife played varsity basketball in high school and is absolutely a baller. And I did not play basketball. And so I will probably be like saying, hey, I'll dominate you until you're 8. And then mom will roast you the rest of your life. So enjoy that.
No, I love it. It's so fun.
Cool.
That's awesome, Aundi.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us, Aundi.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and just thank you both for what you're doing. Thanks for
Yeah.
your authenticity and just what just really needed. And I'm so glad that you are doing the deep work in the ways that you are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for saying that.
Yeah. Well, to everybody listening, we're glad you're here. Keep coming back. You're worth it.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to another episode. Listen, we're working on some really practical resources to help you connect more deeply with yourself and others. So if you head over to our website, 3percentco.com, you can learn more about that. The link will be in the show notes. And this is the part of the show where we ask you for some help. Listen, we don't have a big fancy production team. We're recording these in my therapy office in between sessions and in the margins of our life. We just really believe in the message that much. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and rarely would I take the time to review and rate a show, just because honestly, I forgot. It wasn't until we started doing this show that I realized doing that actually really does help these platforms notice our show and get the word out. And so if any of this is impactful to you, we would love it if you took a second to leave us a review, rate us, or if you want to just do it the old-fashioned way, text this link to a friend and say, hey, let's talk about this episode. Whatever you do, make sure to follow us on whatever platform you're listening to so you never miss an episode. We're really grateful you're here, and we'll see you next week.
So let's be honest, be honest.